Fox News Alert now, a new reaction to one of the largest immigration enforcement raids in our country's history. Welcome back to America's Newsroom, brand new hour. I'm Sandra Smith.
And I'm Bill Hemmer. Smitty, good morning to you. ICE raiding food processing plants in Mississippi, rounding up almost 700 undocumented workers. The DA's office assisting with warrants to execute those sweeps. Here's the U.S. Attorney Michael Hurst on how that went down.
The United States of America is the greatest nation in the history of the world. And it's no wonder that people from around the world want to come here to our country. But while we do welcome folks from other countries, they have to follow our laws.
Steve Harrigan has more on this story, picks it up from Atlanta, Georgia today. Steve, good morning.
Bill, good morning. ICE officials are calling this the largest single-state series of raids in the workplace in history. As many as 600 agents were involved. The target mainly chicken processing plants in small cities around Jackson, Mississippi. Now, the timing was difficult. It happened in the hours before President Trump arrived in El Paso to mourn the murder of 22 people there, gunned down in part because they were seen as Hispanic immigrants. Immigration officials were quick to say there was no connection between the raids and the attack in El Paso, that these raids were planned up to 1 year in advance. As for the raids themselves, the agents surrounded the perimeters of the factories and the chicken processing plants. They checked people for proof of residency. Those without proof of residency had their hands zip-tied behind their back, their personal belongings placed in clear plastic bags. They were put on buses and taken to an airport hangar for processing. Some were arrested for crimes. Others will be deported almost immediately. And still others, depending on humanitarian reasons, could be released with ankle bracelets.
I'm told those who were detained initially and released for humanitarian reasons are being shipped back to the point from where they were detained. So whether it be Canton or Bay Springs or Morton, if they are being released by HSI for humanitarian reasons, they will be put in the same situation they were found this morning.
Another difficult detail about these raids in some of the cities that occurred on the first day of school. That meant that some parents were separated from their children while the children were at school. This created some real sadness, some confusion, even some panic. This small girl said her father was taken away.
I want to say something to my dad because they're not doing nothing to my dad. They're not doing nothing bad. So I want my dad to be free and everybody else. And those children are crying because of their dad and mom missing. I don't want my dad.
Communities in Mississippi were scrambling to try to do what they could to help, especially the children. One gym opened its doors to shelter some of those children, and bus drivers were told not to drop children off at home unless there was visible proof of a parent actually being home. If no parent was home, they were to be taken back to school. Immigration officials were clear that they were targeting not just illegal workers here in Mississippi, but also targeting companies that knowingly hire them. Bill, back to you.
Thank you. Steve Harrigan on that story today from Atlanta. Sandra?
For more on all this, let's bring in Tom Homan, a retired ICE director and Fox News contributor. Tom, thank you for being here. Can you add to what we are hearing about this raid, one of the largest single-state raids in our country's history?
Well, a couple of things. When I was ICE director, I directed the increase of worksite enforcement by 400%. And HSI actually surpassed that about 420%. And they're continuing that work today for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's a magnet that draws the illegal aliens to our country. If they think they can get here and get by the Border Patrol and get a job, they keep coming, which of course is not only one of the reasons our border is out of control, it also puts themselves in harm's way to hire a criminal organization to smuggle them. 31% of women are being sexually assaulted. Children are dying. We got to pull these magnets away. But on this specific operation, something your other reporter didn't talk about, this is a criminal operation. People need to understand that. We're talking about identity theft. We're talking about tax evasion. It's illegal. It's a violation of criminal statute to knowingly hire an illegal alien. It is a felony to conceal and harbor an illegal alien in your premises. So this is a criminal investigation that's going to help a lot of U.S. citizens whose identity has been stolen, their credits have been ruined by illegal aliens using their Social Security numbers to get employment.
How do you respond to that little girl we just heard from? Through her tears, Her father was taken away in this raid. She said, my dad didn't do anything. He's not a criminal. It pulls at your heartstrings when you hear that.
You know, it does, and I've done this with, over 3 decades. And look, immigration enforcement is always controversial, is emotional. But you know what? The blame needs to be placed on her father. Her father came to this country illegally. He brought his child here illegally, whether he brought her here illegally or she was born here. He put his family in the position of being here illegally in violation of our laws. He should have took better action to protect his family. But let me explain what ICE does in an operation like this. If he's a sole care provider, he's a parent, there's no other parent available or any relative available, he will be released on an ankle bracelet to go home and take care of his child. No child can be left unattended. If there's another parent there, the dad may stay in custody. If there isn't, he'll be released. ICE, during their interviews, all these employees are asking, one of the first questions going to ask them, is there children at home under the age of 18? Where are they? How can we contact them? So ICE does an awful lot to make sure these kids are taken care of. Again, it's sad. Separations happen all the time. It happens to U.S. citizen families when American citizens get arrested. They get separated. It's unfortunate. It's sad, but you can't blame the men and women of ICE who are enforcing laws enacted by Congress. And for Congressman Castro to come out and say this is about hate and a fear message to immigrants, he needs to read the very laws Congress enacted that makes it a crime to knowingly hire illegal aliens.
Let me get his words in here so you can respond further. Here is Joaquin Castro's statement on these ICE raids, saying, quote, let's be clear, ICE raids of this scale are not conducted for the purpose of immigration enforcement. They're to strike fear in our communities in a time when Latinos are already living in terror. Continue with your response to Joaquin Castro.
He is wrong. He is so wrong. This is about enforcing the immigration law. This is about laws that Congress enacted. I think Congress is in the habit of creating laws, enacting laws they didn't want to enforce. As a lawmaker, he needs to do one thing. He needs to go back and read the very statutes that Congress wrote about illegal immigration and hiring illegal immigrants. He's a lawmaker. If you don't like it, change it. But don't vilify the men and women who strap a gun to every day to do the job that Congress expects them to do.
I want to end with this criticism from Donna Brazil, former interim chair of the DNC. She joined us last hour, I should say 9 o'clock hour, and said this.
I woke up thinking about the little children in Mississippi who are getting up this morning without a parent, through no fault of their own. I know their parents may be here, with no documentation, but still they have nobody to bathe them, to comb their hair, to send them off to school. And yet, did the owners of that facility, were they arrested? Were they arrested?
You address that, Tom?
Yes, the owners are under criminal investigation, absolutely. And like children, I said earlier, ICE will make sure the child has some sort of daycare provider. But
they're under investigation, or were they arrested?
This is a criminal investigation. They're going to have to prove the charges in district court. But let me end with this: that if the message we want to keep sending the rest of the world is, come to the United States illegally, get a job, and because it may be sad or unfortunate you get separated from your child for a time while you're being processed, if that's the message we want to send, that we're not serious about enforcing immigration laws, you're never going to solve the border crisis. More women are going to be raped, more children are going to die, and criminal cartels get richer, the same cartels that have murdered Border Patrol agents. So you can't have it both ways. Either we enforce law or we don't. Non-enforced law means open borders, and this country doesn't want open borders.
So just to be clear, I'm sorry to harbor this, the owners of the facilities, were they taken as well?
I do not know that for sure. I can tell you that what I know, this is a criminal investigation that started on identity theft, tax evasion, harboring. So if they can prove a case against them, they will be charged. I mean, almost all worksite investigations start as a criminal investigation and ends with a prosecution of those who knowingly hire illegal aliens.
I know that we will be digging into this and find out a lot more in coming days. We appreciate you coming on to React this morning. Tom Homan, thank you.
Thank you.
Another alert, new report from the Pentagon now showing ISIS gaining strength again in Syria. The president insisting on removing U.S. forces from that theater. Former CIA Station Chief Dan Hoffman spoke with us a bit earlier today about that report.
The president has drawn down some of our capacity in Syria, and the question for the administration is this the right amount of roughly 1,000 troops with some intelligence capacity? It's always challenging when we outsource to foreign actors.
Pentagon reporter Lucas Tomlinson picks it up from there. Lucas, what do we have?
Bill, at a press conference yesterday afternoon, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said he had not read the report, but didn't appear too worried about ISIS.
This administration is incredibly mindful of the success we've had versus ISIS and the challenge that it continues to present to the world. We understand that the threat from terrorism, more broadly than just ISIS, continues to exist in the world, and we're doing all the right things.
The new report warns ISIS is coming back in Syria and returning to its insurgent roots in Iraq. At a refugee camp in northeast Syria, there are 45,000 ISIS supporters and family members with minimal security watching over them, according to the Pentagon's report. It also states, quote, the Iraqi military lacked the hold forces in areas recaptured from ISIS, and U.S.-backed fighters in Syria also lacked personnel. 10,000 ISIS fighters remain detained in Syria, but many countries are reluctant to take back the foreign fighters. Last night on Special Report, Britain's new top diplomat issued the following warning.
Are you worried that ISIS is making a resurgence?
I think the one thing we've learned about Islamic-based militancy, terrorism from Al-Qaeda through to Daesh is that you cannot take your eye off the ball. But I think we're unlikely to see extra troops deployed in that area.
The U.S. military has cut roughly half its forces in Syria and wants other countries like the U.K. to step up. Now, that doesn't appear to be happening. The report also warns of an increased threat from Iran. Yesterday, in a separate warning, the Pentagon said Iranian forces are jamming the GPS devices aboard commercial vessels in the Persian Gulf to lure them into Iranian waters. Bill?
Thank you, Lucas. Lucas Tomlinson for the Pentagon there. Sandra.
A Trump donor speaking out in an attempt to shame him for backing President Trump.
He wasn't just publishing a list of donors. He was hoping that they would be discombobulated or harassed or whatever, etc. And I just think we all have a right, we have in America a right to free speech.
Meanwhile, Congressman Joaquin Castro is still defending the move. We will tell you how the president is now firing back this morning. Wall Street Journal's Kim Strassel is on deck.
Also, the shootings in El Paso and Dayton reigniting the push to do more on guns in America. President Trump says he supports more background checks. So will then both sides put aside the rhetoric and actually work towards significant change. We will hear from the 2020 campaign on that coming up next.
So we will sit down, we will think clearly, because that's what the people expect us to do, and we will look at the ways we can make society safer. I support what the president is doing, trying to bring Congress together to look at these issues. Many of those are federal issues. Background checks, can they be strengthened? I think there's support for that if it's done correctly, not only by gun owners, but the general public, Republicans and Democrats. The red flag laws are difficult. You have to be very careful that you're not taking away someone's rights while also being sure that people who shouldn't have guns in their hands do not have those guns.
Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick there saying he is open to new gun reform laws floated by President Trump already. And we're learning that the president did speak to NRA Chief Wayne LaPierre on Tuesday. Mark Ladders, Director of Strategy Communications for Trump 2020. Mark, good morning. Have you been given any information about what was transpired on that phone call?
Not specifically as it relates to that phone call, but it's not unusual for the president, as he is considering and weighing various policy options, to hear from all sides on these issues. And obviously, something like this, the NRA would have a communication and a thought on those issues. So it makes sense that the president would also hear from them as he is considering all of these options.
What are you hearing about willingness on the part of the president and Republicans to come forward and show their willingness to change some gun laws in this country?
Well, I think as the president said, there's a great appetite, especially on the red flag laws, because look, we've already had examples where these kinds of things have worked. I go back to See Something, Say Something, post 9/11, and I'd even add friends don't let friends drive drunk. We have it in our heart in America to be able to reach out when we see someone close to us that may be going down a dark path, or we see something out of place, notifying the authorities and then letting that process play itself out. I think that's what the president's talking about here, and if we can stop somebody from going down that path, being a threat to themselves or to other people, I think it's something that a lot of people would take advantage of, and it could save lives.
Well, there's a lot of discussion about where the two sides can potentially come together to enact some sort of change. Senator Chris Coons was on Fox News earlier today and said this.
We need to find ways to legislate together. And the president's leadership on taking real steps on background checks will be critical. Both the governor of Ohio, Mike DeWine, the congressman from Dayton, Mike Turner, and the Republican senator from Ohio, Rob Portman, have now stepped forward and called for more decisive action. There is legislation we can take up and pass.
Which leaves the big question still, what can be done? And where does the discussion need to be politically to keep guns out of the hands of individuals like the killers in both Texas and Ohio over last weekend?
I think the president is taking the right approach, that there is no single thing that can be done. We have to do an all the above. The president has already taken strong action to strengthen and close loopholes in our background check system, and more may need to be done, and he's willing to have that conversation. But when you add red flag laws and then the other things that the president has done, like banning bump stocks, we can work together on this, but the mental health side has to be a part of this discussion. We've got to get out of this partisanship that blames politics for what's going on right now, because anytime we're not blaming anyone other than the shooter, we're doing ourselves a disservice and just trying to score cheap political points.
While some are calling for bipartisanship in the wake of those shootings, a couple presidential candidates, the frontrunner Joe Biden and Beto O'Rourke, saying this week.
As the sitting president, Trump's anger, hate, and divisiveness, pitting Americans against one another, the epidemic of guns, is fueling a literal carnage in America.
How worried are you that with Donald Trump still in the Oval Office, something like this will inevitably happen again?
It will happen again.
He says it's going to happen again if the president remains in office. Biden talking about in response to that.
I mean, this is absolutely shameful. This was a day yesterday where the president was trying to bring our nation together. There are reports now coming out where the president was down on one knee so children could hug him while they were visiting hospitals. And you heard, obviously, even the mayor of Dayton talking about the warm reception and the love that he received and the First Lady received. And for them to take partisan shots on a day when we're trying to come together, it's just cheap. And it's not even true what the vice president was saying. And as opposed to the former congressman from Texas, I mean, this is just blatant scare tactics that the left always tries. It's not going to work. Let's stop it with this and get back to trying to heal and come together rather than tearing people apart.
Our thoughts remain with all those communities still trying to heal this morning. Mark Lauder, we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra.
In the meantime, there are developments this morning on a new Hollywood movie that depicts the killing of Trump supporters. Will The Hunt still be released even after the mass shootings in El Paso and Dayton? We'll have a look at that in a moment.
Introducing the all-new Chevy Silverado. With 50 industry firsts, it's the strongest, most advanced Silverado ever.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Who am I?
Wow, is that really me?
Hi, I'm Annette. Under eye bags and wrinkles are so frustrating. I came across Plexiderm and I was so excited. We have a model. His name is Richie, and all he's doing is taking a small amount. It's so powerful. That's all it takes. It literally creates an invisible layer that tightens the skin and smooths it out. All you do is gently rub it underneath your eyes, on your fine lines and wrinkles, and it visibly disappears in as little as 10 minutes.
You know, I felt something happening, but I had no idea. Like, I have so many dark circles. I have the puffiness.
The film is billed as satire. Here's an image from the trailer showing a woman running through the woods next to a sign that reads, "Warning, only designated people may be hunted in this area." Now, while the ads for marketing the film have been pulled, the movie is still set to open next month. Guy Benson, political editor, townhall.com, Fox News contributor, host of the Guy Benson Show on radio. And Guy, good morning to you. I haven't seen it. I know you haven't seen it. What do you make of what's happening here?
Well, I think at the very least it's the right thing to pull the marketing, or at least hit the pause button on promoting this film. I think the country's in a pretty raw place. We had dozens of people shot, many of them killed, over the last couple days, last weekend. So to have a movie, even though it's satire, that depicts Americans hunting and killing Americans. I think that's maybe not an image that a lot of people want to see at the moment.
Pretty much a step too far, huh? What do you mean? You say at the moment?
Well, I think in terms of, you have to think about this within the context of the news cycle, right? This is satire. I'm not someone who supports trying to ban movies or call for movies to be pulled completely because they depict things that are very uncomfortable or even rather quite offensive. This is how satire works sometimes, even if it's very dark. I just think when you're marketing a movie like that, in this moment, given what happened, you're going to really offend a lot of people, and that's why they are, I think, rightly stopping the promotion for the moment.
Here is apparently one of the back and forth. Did anyone see what our expletive-in-chief just did? The second character says, at least the hunt's coming up, nothing better than going out to the manor and slaughtering a dozen deplorables. You're a little cautious when it comes to the speech police. I can hear that in your answer. Here's what Universal said. Out of sensitivity to the attention of the country's recent shooting tragedies, Universal Pictures and the filmmakers The Hunt have temporarily paused its marketing campaign and are reviewing materials as we move forward. You score that as a smart move, Guy.
Yeah, Americans don't want to turn on their televisions, especially right now, and see trailers for a movie, again, that shows a certain group of people being hunted down and shot by other people, even if it's satire. As I said, Bill, and you're absolutely right, I am not in favor of saying, let's squash the whole project, let's have a giant boycott. These types of movies aren't allowed to be made in America. I think that there is a sensitivity that the studio needs to have when it comes to promoting the film. And also, I don't know if it's already finished yet, but if they want to add sort of a rip-from-the-headlines twist to the movie, perhaps they can write in a character of a Democratic congressman releasing a list of deplorables to find around the country to be hunted, perhaps.
Yeah, we'll see if they're taking ideas, huh? Thank you, Guy. Guy Benson on that today in Washington. Nice to see you.
Meanwhile, the FDA launching a new investigation into vaping. The incidents that are raising concerns now. Our doctor will be here on that. Plus, new fallout after Congressman Joaquin
Quite frankly, maybe I was a little naive, but I just was angered by the fact that anybody would, I mean, being outed as a contributor wasn't the problem, but tying me to that horrific tragedy in El Paso was galling. It just made me sick to my stomach.
Trump donor Mark Hanrahan, who was named by Congressman Joaquin Castro on Twitter, the Texas Democrat and brother of 2020 presidential candidate Julian Castro, tweeting out the names of 44 top Trump donors. But it turns out some of those donors gave to the Castro brothers as well. Leland Vitter is live at the White House with all that. Leland.
Hey, Sandra. Yeah, it's not unusual in politics for donors to give money to members of both parties. It is very unusual, though, for a politician to name and shame one of their donors on Twitter. Turns out Joaquin Castro did it to a number of them. Of the 44 donors to President Trump's campaign that Castro called out, it turns out 3 of them gave thousands to Castro's campaign as well. In fact, close to $12,500 to him, and another 3 donors told the Washington Examiner they donated to Castro's mayoral campaign. Not surprisingly, one of them, Wayne Harwell, a San Antonio real estate executive, not so happy. I was also on the list of people that gave to Castro, he said. Enough that he wants to put my name out there against Trump. I'm not going to give money to him, has been before. Here is what the president had to say about him on Twitter. The most is not much. Keep fighting Joaquin. That 1% refers to Julian Castro's standing in the latest polls for the Democratic nomination. Julian wrote this: Joaquin and I will keep fighting. The American people will fight every day for our nation against your hate, your corruption, and your ego, and we will win. Now, the Castros may be pledging to fight, Sandra, and continue fighting, but at least right now it appears as they're going to have to continue that fight with one less donor.
Leland Vitter at the White House for us this morning. Leland, thanks.
I want to bring in Kimberly Strassel from the Wall Street Journal editorial board and a Fox News contributor. And Kimberly, good morning to you. And you've been reading about this. What strikes me is that soundbite we heard from that donor a moment ago. You can tell people I give to candidates, that's okay with them, but do not tie me to the massacre in El Paso.
Right. There were 2 fouls here. One, it is, in fact, irresponsible and inappropriate for a public official to out and then target donors, especially in this day and age where we are seeing so much violence out there. We know what comes from that. We've seen the consequences of it in the past. That's one thing. Two, and as well, then to tie anybody who expressed a political favoritism via donations as tying to them to extremist acts and acts of violence is also totally inappropriate. And you know, I hope both Castro brothers, who seem to be unrepentant about the fact that this happened, that they are willing to take responsibility for any consequences that come from these actions.
Well, you're right about that last point. They have not backed down. It does not appear that they will either. Here is Donna Brazil earlier today with Sandra on our program.
When you decide in a political rally on Twitter, social media, to put names out, you put people in jeopardy. You put them in jeopardy because you don't put the context. This is a First Amendment right to contribute to any candidate.
A couple of things she said there. I don't know if they're in jeopardy or not, but the First Amendment right is indeed a fact. It's free speech.
Yeah, she's completely right. And also, there have been some people out there who are suggesting, well, this is public information, so fair game. Well, actually, the reason we have campaign finance disclosure laws is to hold government accountable, to make sure that politicians are not engaging in cronyism, bribery, pay to play. It's not to hold the citizenry responsible for their political views. It's not to try to intimidate them, use it as a tool to try to scare them out of expressing their political views. And people are getting that completely backward.
How about the irony that 6 of the donors gave money to the Castro brothers in return? I'm going to turn to this tech meeting at the White House tomorrow. We'll see who shows up. I'm not quite sure who is going to attend or what the invite list looks like. But this was the president just a few weeks ago, early July on that.
I am not speaking for our side, assuming we're all, I don't even know if you're on our side. You could be some of the most liberal people in the world in this audience, and that's okay. I don't care. But we're talking about for everybody. Big tech must not censor the voices of the American people.
Part of the reason why this is coming up because of this Mitch McConnell thing here. People went to his house. They were quite loud and rude with their language. The McConnell team wanted to post it, and they were held back from doing that. At the same time, there's a list online for on the Twitter handle that goes after Mitch McConnell. What his campaign is saying is he can't have it both ways. I think the tricky part in all this, Kimberly, though, is how you police this, and can you do it fairly and appropriately?
Well, look, I think the tech companies have got a big challenge ahead of them, and they are going to need to become very proactive about this because, you know, there's a lot of politicians on both sides of the aisle that are currently unhappy with big tech for a variety of issues. And if they don't step up and start trying to handle this proactively and privately on their own, they're going to find themselves regulated in ways that they're not going to appreciate.
So they have to make the first move. And perhaps in the long run, they're better off. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, this has gone from an issue, the censorship of conservatives, from something that was just grumbling among some members of the conservative community to becoming a top and overriding priority in the party. And look, I don't care who you are in big business, what your political beliefs are. Having the entire party believe that you are gunning for them when those people have some measure of control in Washington and state legislatures, that's just not a place you want to be as a business. It's why businesses tend to sort of give donations equally, et cetera. So they have a real problem when, you know, half of the country believes that they are biased against them.
Yeah, Kimberly, thank you so much for your commentary today. Kimberly Strassel, Wall Street Journal. Nice to see you again. Thank you. Sandra.
Former special counsel Robert Mueller drawing new scrutiny now from Republican lawmakers, why some are suggesting Mueller may have misled Congress. We're going to hear from former Deputy Independent Counsel Saul Weisenberg. He'll join us next.
Did your May 29th press conference have anything to do with the fact that the previous day the judge threatened to hold your prosecutors in contempt for misrepresenting evidence? No.
So the Emmy-winning series American Crime Story returning to the airwaves weeks before the 2020 election. Season 3, by the way, is all about the Clinton-Lewinsky sex scandal. Former White House intern Monica Lewinsky is one of the producers of American Crime Story, Impeachment, set to debut in September on FX, and the network's president says it will be told from the point of view of the women involved in the Ken Starr investigation.
Meanwhile, one Republican congressman raising questions about Robert Mueller's testimony to Congress last month. On May 28th, a federal judge rebuked Mueller and his lawyers for overstating evidence that the Kremlin directed key parts of the 2016 election interference. One day later, you'll remember this moment when Mueller held a news conference that Republicans now suspect doubled as a cleanup effort to back off of those claims as ordered by the judge. And they say Mueller possibly committed perjury by denying that when he appeared before Congress. Saul Weisenberg is a former deputy independent counsel and a Fox News contributor. Saul, good morning to you.
Good morning.
So some Republican members of Congress are alleging that Mueller may have perjured himself when it came to the timeline and what may or may not have happened. Do they have any evidence of that?
No, not really. I mean, they're concerned about the suspicious timing of things. Apparently on the day before Mueller's press conference, the judge excoriated in a private hearing, harshly criticized the Mueller team for a certain portion of the Mueller report that was broader than the indictments in the case that she had. These are the troll farm cases, and Mueller in his report basically states that it was directed by the Russian government. Prejudicing these defendants, if you guys make any statements in the future, you better not repeat what you did in the Mueller report. He happened to go out the next day, the day that he announced the ending of his investigation, and he was very careful to say the troll farm operation is not connected to the Russian government. So people are putting those two things together and saying he must have perjured himself in his testimony because he was asked whether the calling of that press conference had anything to do with the judge's criticism, and he said no. But that's really all they have right now are suspicious circumstances.
So let's dig
However,
into let's dig into that exchange so you can further respond. Here's Tom McClintock with Robert Mueller during his testimony last month.
Why did you suggest Russia was responsible for the troll farms when in court you've been unable to produce any evidence to support it?
Well, I'm not going to get into that any further than I already have.
But you have left the clear impression throughout the country through your report that it was the Russian government behind the troll farms, and yet when you're called upon to provide actual evidence in court, you fail to do so.
So we do know that the U.S. District Court Judge Dabney Frederick called on attorneys that were prosecuting this case into their courtroom. It was a closed hearing, and that judge made the case that Mueller had overstated the evidence when he was applying in that report to Congress that the trolls were controlled by the Russian government, among other things. So could Republicans lay out evidence that Robert Mueller perjured himself in that testimony?
First of all, you would have to show in a court of law that his testimony was even false. Then you would have to prove that he intentionally lied. Look, let's face it, let's be real. There's never going to be a criminal referral of Bob Mueller for that exchange. There's never going to be an indictment of Bob Mueller for that exchange. What I think is interesting is that we all give a person like Bob Mueller the benefit of the doubt in this situation, but isn't it interesting how nobody gave Jeff Sessions the benefit of the doubt? He misspoke when he testified in front of the Senate about his contacts with Russians during the campaign, and Andrew McCabe apparently immediately opened up, or at some point shortly thereafter, opened up a perjury investigation of Jeff Sessions. It's too bad that Sessions wasn't given the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps General Flynn should have been given the benefit of the doubt that is going to be given to Bob Mueller here. So is there a double standard, or was there a double standard? There was in some situations, but Bob Mueller is in no danger whatsoever.
Well, the case is very clearly laid out in this real clear investigations piece, and you can see exactly what the judge was directing to happen there. This is McClintock in that Real Clear Investigations piece on Mueller's testimony saying, quote, "It certainly doesn't pass the smell test. If he lied, he's guilty of perjury and lying to Congress. I think this would be of interest to the U.S. Attorney investigating misconduct in this matter and the Inspector General's office. But you say Bob Mueller will never be prosecuted for perjury. Saul, final words.
There's not even going to be a referral. And all they've done is laid out a chronological timeline. They haven't shown that Mueller even said anything false when he said, I didn't call the press conference because of what the judge said. I mean, it's not unusual to call a press conference when you're closing down an office. So they haven't made the case.
All right. Saul Weisenberg.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you. Always good to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
In a moment, a new investigation on vaping, disturbing reports about potential side effects. Tell you how the FDA is responding on that when our doctor checks in the House next.